You're listening to the Nourished Child Podcast with Jill Castle, episode number 101.
Welcome to the Nourished Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hello, everyone. How are you? We are back in the swing of things here. Well, almost all the way back in the swing of things. Kind of, sort of, not entirely there because I still have kids home for the holidays as I'm doing this recording. It's funny how college doesn't start to get back into the swing of things until mid-January. So it makes for a long break for some of these kiddos. It also makes for lots of moving parts. Like this morning when I woke up and my refrigerator door was open and had been beeping probably all night long, or all the lights in the house being left on. Yeah, sometimes I think, I love my kids, I love them a lot, but sometimes they're not getting it. So I had to have a conversation about that today with most of them. There's only a couple that are big culprits in this scenario. But this is one of my favorite parts of the year. I know everybody does the New Year's resolutions, and I did the Happy New Year in the last version, but I really like January. I always feel so motivated and organized. I did spend a couple of my holiday break days organizing my office, cleaning things out, old files, burning old files, rearranging my desk, which I'm sitting at now as I record this, promising myself I would light a candle when I was working. I don't know, it just adds an ambiance and an aura that is conducive for me to work. But I actually feel like all that organizing and cleaning out the clutter and all this stuff makes me be excited to be at my desk and working. I'm really testing myself to stay on track with all of my weekly and daily business and personal goals, those being around the work that needs to get done, but also around the workouts that I enjoy doing. But I'll tell you what, already it's not easy to stay on track. Lots of phone calls and emails get me sidetracked, not to mention social media, which I've been trying to put my blinders on and not look at. So I don't know what your new year is looking like and what you've promised to yourself, but hopefully things are going well. But I know they probably aren't without the little bumps and blips in the road. I think we all experience them, but I'm cheering you on. I'm a big fan of yours and hoping that you reach all those little resolutions and promises and goals that you've made for yourself in 2020. So today on the show, I have Dr. Jennifer Harris, who is a leading expert on food marketing to youth. Her research is widely used by the public health community and policymakers to improve the food marketing environment surrounding children and teens in the United States and worldwide. Currently, she is a senior research advisor, marketing initiatives at the Red Center. Previously, Dr. Harris worked as director of marketing initiatives and was an associate professor in allied health sciences at the University of Connecticut. She has received her BA from Northwestern University and an MBA in marketing from the Wharton School. She's perfect to be doing this research on food marketing to kids. Before returning to graduate school, she was a marketing executive for 18 years, including at American Express as a vice president in consumer marketing and as principal in a marketing strategy consulting firm. She completed her PhD in social psychology at Yale University. So she's a great wealth of knowledge. Not only has she done tons of research in the area of food marketing to children, she has the experience of working in the field of marketing as a business executive. So she has a really interesting perspective on this topic today, which is the topic of toddler milks. So we'll talk about toddler milks, toddler snacks, transition formulas, and all the food innovation and marketing that goes on around those food categories today on the show. You can find today's show notes over at jillcastle.com/101. That's 101 for episode number 101. And now it's time for you to meet Dr. Jennifer Harris. But before we do, let's cue the music. Hello, Dr. Harris, and welcome to The Nourished Child.
Thanks for having me.
I'm a big fan of your research. I've used it a lot, and I'm excited to have you on the show today to talk about toddler drinks. I actually saw a quote from you in a Washington Post article about toddler food products and toddler milks. And that's how I sort of thought, oh, she would be great to interview around this. And then I started to dig in and I saw some of your research is in this area, and it's really around policy making. So just in general for the audience who's listening, which happens to be professionals and lots of parents, why don't you tell us about yourself and some of your areas of research and how you got onto the path that you're on in terms of research?
Sure, I'd be happy to. It was kind of a winding road that brought me here. I actually have an MBA in marketing, and I worked in the business world for 20 years before deciding to go back to school and get my PhD in social psychology. I was really interested in studying media effects on children in particular. But when I was there, I met Kelly Brownell, who's a leading public health advocate, and he encouraged me to look into food marketing to kids as a possible research topic. And so I did, and I found that there was a real need for better research in this area, and it was really growing public health crisis. And that sort of set me on this path, which was about 15 years ago now. Since then, I've been doing a lot of research to really inform public health and parents about what companies are marketing to kids, how they're marketing to kids, what techniques they're using, how unhealthy the products are, and how it's affecting children's preferences and diets. And then more recently, we started to look more closely at how companies market foods to parents and products that they're advertising to parents as good for their kids and healthy products. And so that sort of led us into this area of toddler foods. And
it's a booming area, isn't it? I thought I read a statistic that it's a $7 billion industry.
Yeah, I haven't seen that number, but I definitely believe it. You know, companies have created this sort of new age group that, you know, needs special foods. And so, of course, they're well positioned to deliver what they've now convinced parents they need.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, you know, interestingly, I just did an interview with Bettina Siegel, who's the author of the newer book, Kid Food.
Right.
And in her book, I don't know if I've had a chance to look at that book yet, but she does cover quite a bit of the food marketing component to children. And I'm certain she's looked at your research and the Red Center's work in that area. But it is mind-boggling when you look at just the entire breadth of marketing and products in this area for children. And now what we're seeing, or I'm seeing it as just somebody who's, you know, paying attention to this sort of stuff, as more and more getting honed into that toddler age range. So that's what I want to talk about today, particularly toddler milks. We may even touch a little bit on toddler snacks and toddler foods, but it's definitely become a specialty area in the marketplace. Why do you think toddler milks are even in the marketplace?
Well, there's an interesting history for how toddler milks came to be. It actually started outside of the United States. So the World Health Organization has what's called the Code of Marketing Breast Milk Substitutes. And basically in most other countries around the world, except for the United States, companies cannot market infant formula to parents because it discourages breastfeeding and it's not in their best health interests. So what companies did was they created this new product category for children older than 12 months, which they could market outside of the US. So that's really where they came to be. That was many years ago. But what has happened in the United States is that even though they can advertise infant formula here, there's been a decline in infant formula sales because breastfeeding is increasing, which is a great thing. But for the companies, they needed a way to continue to grow their business and to continue to increase their profits. And so what they discovered was that they could start marketing this new category, toddler milks, and really expand the age of children who would be consuming their products.
Do you think then are there real indications for a toddler milk, or is this sort of I don't want to say fabricated, but just sort of a new category that's more of a marketing opportunity than an actual nutritional requirement or need?
Well, I have no problem saying that it's a fabricated product to make designed to meet an unnecessary need. But just recently, the American Academy of Pediatrics, together with the American Heart Association, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and the Pediatric Dentistry Association, came out with a statement saying there's no reason to serve toddler milks to your toddler. What they recommend is plain milk and water for thirst. The reasons not to serve toddler milks is a few of them. One is that they're sweetened products. So these products have added sugar. And when you're trying to get your toddler to change over from breast milk or infant formula to plain milk, it's really important for them to get used to the taste of non-sweet foods because breast milk and formula is sweetened. And so if you start giving them these sweetened drinks, they're never going to acquire that taste for unsweetened drinks. So in our opinion, it's kind of a gateway to, chocolate milk. It's like they have to learn to like plain foods. So that's one concern. The other concern is that they're more expensive than regular milk. So they're really not, if you're on a budget, it's really a waste of your money to be buying these products. But I think one of the more disturbing things to me is that the companies have really, we talked about creating a need. They market these as good for children's cognitive development. They imply that they're good for picky eaters. So if your child isn't eating fruits or vegetables, you can give them this product and they'll get the nutrition that they're missing. They're implying that children need DHA, which is not proven. So all of these are unscientifically proven claims, but parents are really getting the message that they need to buy these products in order for their child to develop.
I have a little story about the sugar, the added sugar in toddler milks, because I reposted on my Facebook page the Washington Post article, and I fully agree. And just for listeners out there, just a point of reference, the American Heart Association advises no added sugar for any child under the age of 2. And I've supported that for years before that's been my philosophy because of the flavor preference issue, as you described so nicely. But I shared that article on my Facebook page, and I had a whole army of moms who obviously are using toddler milks get really upset about that article and the idea that young children need sugar for their brain development and all this sort of misinformation that they were repeating. And it was very interesting to me how they came in defense of toddler milks, how strong they were in defense of toddler milks. And that just to me highlights, I guess, some of the misinformation out there, that marketing messages are enormously powerful, but not always rooted in the science.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing about them is that the companies that offer toddler milks are the main infant formula manufacturers. So I think that creates this degree of trust in these companies that, if you're giving your infant Similac or Enfamil or Gerber, you have to have a high degree of trust in these companies. And that is very powerful. And people have a hard time, especially if you're giving your child these products and they're liking them. It's hard to say I've been fooled or duped or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that leads me to the question, this category, there are two types of formulas that I've seen, the transition formula and the toddler milk. Can you describe the difference between the two for the listeners?
Sure. So the transition formulas are marketed as formulas for 9 to 18 or 24 months. So they're marketed for kids during this transition period. So what they're doing with those products is basically getting parents to continue to serve infant formula to older children who don't need infant formula anymore. So that's one type of product. The other type are we're calling them toddler milks. There is no official term for them, but these are formulas that are marketed as appropriate for 12 months to 24, 36 months. Those products have similar formulations to infant formula, but they're not quite the same. They're typically non-fat powdered milk plus vegetable oils because children at that age need the fat. So they add the vegetable oil to provide the fat. And then they have corn syrup solids or some other kind of sweetener to make them sweet. And then a whole lot of added vitamins and minerals. Yeah.
And when we're talking added sugar, how much are we talking about?
Well, that's an excellent question. It's not clear because these products also have lactose from the milk. So the package lists total sugars, which includes both. Now, in January, major food manufacturers are going to have to start reporting added sugar separately from naturally occurring sugars. So we're thinking that the products, they should have to comply with those new labeling requirements. But as of recently, we haven't seen added sugar listed on any of the labels.
Okay. So in terms of like nutrition facts panels, those drinks will fall under the same requirements as regular food. Are they considered a food product or a supplement?
They're considered a food product. Well, actually, I think we're going to get into labeling and policy in a few minutes, but the FDA doesn't have any category for this product. So the companies label them as a food product.
Okay. So we will get into that in a little bit, but let's talk about marketing. I think it's so fascinating. Did you say you had an MBA in marketing before you got into research?
I do. Yeah.
So you're coming at this from like an insider's perspective. You know all the behind the scenes stuff that happens in the marketing world. I actually am married to an advertiser myself, not in the food realm, thank goodness. But we do talk about, some of the advertising techniques and what, how you get people to convert and all this stuff. So
yes.
You have an insider's perspective as well as a research perspective on this. How do you see these marketing techniques playing out in terms of parents and their knowledge around this, the clarity, the ease of picking a product, the confusion they might be experiencing? What are we talking about here? How are parents potentially confused about toddler milks?
So one thing that I touched on before is that the marketing implies that there's a need. Your child needs DHA, your child needs this product for their cognitive development, to address their picky eating, all of those kinds of things. So, in marketing 101, you create a need and then you create a product to fill that need. So that's basically what they've done with these drinks. The other sort of, I think, more disturbing issue with the marketing is the fact that they're cross-branding them with infant formula. And so, like, if you look at Similac infant formula and Similac Go and Grow, which is their toddler milk, if you look at the packages, they're very, very similar. They use the same branding, the logos are similar, the colors, the size of the package, all of that is really designed to imply that these products are, the same as infant formula, but for older children. So that creates all this implication that they're the best next step if your child is too old for infant formula. It implies, again, that they're necessary for older children. It also is dangerous because what's happening is that these products are side by side, often in the supermarket aisle. The toddler milks are less expensive than the infant formula. Parents of infants are giving the toddler milks to their infants. So we have some data that it's in a paper that's under review right now that showed about 8% of parents of infants were giving toddler milks to their infant. Now, these toddler milks are not designed for infants. They don't have the appropriate nutrition for infants. So that's a very dangerous sort of design to make it difficult to tell the difference between the two.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, side by side, and you probably know this because you've studied these products extensively, I'm sure, but side by side, protein wise, infant formula versus toddler milk, is a toddler milk higher in protein per ounce or per 100 grams?
Yeah.
Probably, I would think.
That's a good question, probably, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. But that just leads me to think, what are we talking about? Renal solute load and things of that nature that are a little bit more critical to be aware of in an infant than a larger child. And I guess my follow-up question, do we have any data? Do we have any cases of hospitalizations or malnutrition, underweight, anything like that has, been a result of picking the wrong milk?
I do not know of any, but that sounds like a great basis for a class action lawsuit. I don't know of it.
Today's episode is brought to you by my workbook, Try New Food: How to Help Picky Eaters Taste, Eat, and Like New Foods. Having a picky eater is not easy. In my book, Try New Food, I give you the approach that preserves your loving relationship while gently exposing your child to new foods, positive feeding interactions, and finding courage and adventure at the meal table. Grab a copy of Try New Food on Amazon in print or Kindle version and start helping your child taste, eat, and like new foods today. Well, let's get into part of, obviously the marketing messaging is sort of setting a platform of confusion for parents potentially. And then we have this other sort of layer of lack of specific regulations for toddler milks in the United States. Let's talk about that a little bit, because I know you've done a lot of work around missing regulations or lack of regulations, especially compared to other countries. Why are we in that position? Why do we not have regulation?
I think the reason we don't have regulation is because the market has really gotten ahead of the public health and regulatory community. So not only do we not have regulation, most of the public health monitoring studies don't even track how many people are giving their kids toddler milks. It's really a new category, and it's really gone under the radar until the last few years. So I think that's if I was going to pick a reason, I think that's why. There's a very strong case that these should be regulated differently. Well, first of all, the FDA regulations about infant formula are very, very strict in terms of labeling and ingredients and all of that. So, that would be a basis for trying to regulate toddler milks in a similar way. The other issue is that I think the biggest issue is that it's called a statement of identity. So every type of food product has to, on their label, what this product is. And in the case of toddler milks, there is no one specified statement of identity, so they all say something different. And the labeling in terms of the age of who these products are intended for is not clearly laid out either. So those are two sort of basic things that the FDA could require immediately.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, when we have this makes me think of supplements too, because this whole, issue in the supplement world exists where it's not a food. So it's a supplement. So it's not regulated in the same manner. And inherently then there are potential dangers for the consumer. It sounds like, stronger regulations would help with consumer confusion as well as provide some safeguards for young children. What do you think are the barriers to regulation? Is it time? Is it legislation? Is it policymakers?
So the FDA has the authority to regulate labeling. So it could be done fairly quickly. I think the issue is that they haven't gotten enough pressure, but it's just in terms of priorities, it hasn't risen to the top, in my opinion. So that's why they need to be informed. Well, and now there's finally an FDA commissioner. Hopefully it won't be too long before this can be addressed.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking also, I remember, and I know that you were involved in this, or I believe you were involved in that voluntary and self-regulation of food marketing to kids movement or policy. It was something that was, can you describe that a little bit just for the listeners out there?
Well, so in the United States, and actually this is the situation in most countries, in response to public health concerns about unhealthy food marketing targeting children, the food industry created a self-regulatory voluntary program. This was in 2007. It was fully implemented. They promised to market healthier dietary choices to children. Over the years, we've done a lot of research to monitor how effective it is, and it's really not very effective. I mean, companies have been able to find loopholes and get around the restrictions that they've placed on themselves, surprisingly. I think the other major issue is that these companies are not selling healthy food. They're not selling broccoli. They're not selling apples. They're selling processed food. And so what they've done is they've reduced the sugar a little bit. So cereals used to have 13 grams of sugar in a serving. Now they have 9 or 10. I mean, it's still a third sugar. It's not a healthy choice for children, but, in their mind, they've improved marketing to children. So there really isn't any incentive for them to actually market healthy food to children just because they don't have the products that children should be eating more of.
Mm-hmm. Why hasn't this been a mandatory regulation versus a voluntary regulation for food companies?
In the United States, the FTC used to have the authority to regulate marketing to children. In the 70s, they tried to crack down on that, and Congress took away their authority to regulate advertising to children. So there's no regulatory body that is responsible for that. In the US, at around the same time that the Children's Food and Beverage Advertising Initiative was implemented, a lot of people realized it wasn't strong enough. And so the government set up an agency commission with the FTC, the FDA, the USDA, maybe forgetting another one, to come up with voluntary policies about food marketing to kids. So they came up with a set of recommendations for how companies should be marketing to children, which had, very strict nutrition standards and covered all the ways that companies market to children. They put out those voluntary recommendations for public comment. The public comments were overwhelmingly in support of them, and the lobbying was heavily against it, and the voluntary recommendations were never published. So, just the power of the food industry in this country is incredible. Now, internationally, there's been some progress. Chile has very strong marketing to kids laws that covered advertising as well as product packaging. So you can't, in Chile, now have Tony the Tiger or Dora the Explorer on unhealthy food products. That's the strongest one out there. Canada has been trying to pass legislation since Trudeau was elected the first time, and they're running into huge lobbying against it. So that law isn't dead yet, but it's really struggling.
Yeah, it's really amazing how much power there is, and it goes right up to DC. It goes right up to Congress. So, yeah, and I was going to ask you about, the other international countries are doing a better job than we are in protecting our children around this topic of food marketing.
Other countries are trying. I mean, there's been a law in the UK for several years now that covers both TV advertising and digital marketing. One of the things that we found in just about every country that has passed a law is that the industry is really smart about how to get around the law. So, the law says don't do this, then they'll find a way to do a little bit different from this and get away with it. And it's tough. I mean, I honestly think that maybe the only way to get companies to change what they're doing is public pressure and consumer pressure. I think consumers don't realize how much power they have with the companies. If they stopped buying the products, then companies would have to change. Or if they started, complaining about what the companies are doing in social media, through blogs and all of that sort of thing, and there was enough public pressure, they will change. I mean, this has happened with GMOs. For some reason, I think that people tend to think these unhealthy products that are being advertised to kids are just not as bad as the public health and nutrition community think they are.
Yeah, I find that too. I mean, that story I told you about the Facebook, I think that they're just not even recognizing the fact that there's sugar, and that sets the blueprint for food preferences for a long time. And, even if we move away from toddler milks and we talk about toddler snack foods, and I'm not against puffs and pouches and all that stuff, but, my philosophy is balance, and there's a place, and not a huge place, but there can be a place for those products. But a lot of consumers rely on those things. They are not the secondary emergency thing. They are the primary food in their child's diets. And as a dietitian, I think that, my filter is always going to be, whole foods,
Right.
Introduce all this variety, all these flavors, all these textures, and multiple puffs every day for a snack just is not driving you towards the goal of having a healthy eater down the road. But I don't know. Sometimes I think, is it just parents are so rushed? They're so lost without, knowing what to do. This seems so much easier, so much more convenient. And the messaging is supporting their, not only just their thinking about it, but their desires about having more freedom and not, slaving over the stove. And I don't know, it's just very confusing, I think, for parents. And we are now just hitting the younger and younger sectors of our population, which is a little disappointing and depressing, as a professional.
Yeah, I agree. And, we've done a bunch of focus groups with parents of toddlers, especially. And there's just so many things going on that are pushing them in the wrong direction. I mean, one is the sense that parents are always, and I mean, I think this has been since the beginning of time, concerned that their child isn't eating enough and that their child is going to starve, and that if their child refuses to eat the healthy food, then they have to give them something. Otherwise, they're going to, waste away, or I don't know what.
Disappear into thin air.
Yeah. So that, I think, is part of it. And most of the parents that we've talked to really understand that at 12 months or so, your child, doesn't need as much food as they used to. So they're always trying to get them to eat more. You need to expose your child to lots of different flavors and textures and all of that, over time for them to start to like those foods and to eat those foods regularly. And if you end up giving them, these highly palatable, high fat, high sugar foods, they hear this information from their pediatrician, and most of them don't ever speak to a nutrition professional. And then on the other hand, the companies are sending them all these messages about your child's a picky eater. What are you going to do? And give them a Pediasure or Enfagrow or toddler snacks.
When you look back, you have this marketing background and you're a researcher now for, almost 2 decades. Where do your frustrations lie?
Well, the companies, I just think what they're doing is unconscionable, especially when it's products for these youngest children. I just don't understand how they can sleep at night marketing these products and creating this concern and making the parents' jobs more difficult. The public health community is also to blame in some respect. I think that this idea that public health can work with the food industry to increase healthier children's diets, I think is just a smokescreen that the companies want to make us think that they want to do that, when in reality, I don't think they're terrible people or misleading or anything, but I don't think they can, because they always have to increase sales to shareholders. And even if they want to do the right thing, it's probably going to hurt their business, especially if their competitors aren't doing it. And I never blame parents. I think all parents love their children and they want to see their children eat healthy and grow up. My youngest was in grade school when I started doing this research, and I never thought these foods were so terrible. I mean, I admit I bought sugar-sweetened cereals and Capri Suns and Sunny D for my children when they were younger. I never would now, but at the time, I thought they were fine. So I think it's really on the companies and the public health community to work harder to get the right foods out there.
Mm-hmm. Do you have glimmers of hope that keep you going?
That's a good question. Some days, other days, no. I think what we're seeing is that with more educated parents and higher income parents, we've definitely seen changes. We've seen reductions in children consuming, fruit drinks and sodas and things like that. But what I worry about most is the lower income and communities of color that, don't have the resources to buy. For them, like just getting through the day is a challenge to, then be worried about your child having sugar or whatever. It's really, when your life is stressful, that's not your top priority. You just want to and you don't have enough money for food. You just want them to eat. And so that's what I worry about the most.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I hope that parents become much more savvy about nutrition and feeding their kids and calm down. And I would love, I have dreams about us going back to the 50s and 60s where we cooked more and we ate around the table. Yeah. And I see things, go around and come around and go around and come around. And maybe someday we'll head back in that area. I understand the business aspect and I understand the public health messaging personally. I feel needs to be a little bit different for today's parents. They're not hearing the expose your child to more, taste preferences are largely developed by age 5. These are messaging that parents listen to. I know they listen to it because I have communications with parents. And I just wish the public health messaging was more along these more practical, informative messaging as opposed to 5 a day, 5 a day. Nobody's listening to that anymore. It's not effective. It's not moving the needle. So That's where I have a little bit of frustration. But if you were to, really just right now, as we wrap this up, speak to parents of toddlers who are potentially listening to this show and thinking, oh my God, I've been using Toddler Milks. I buy the puffs. I've got all the pouches in my cabinet. What would you want to say to them?
I think what parents need to understand is that, first of all, their child will eat if they're hungry. So that's like one worry that they can just put aside. And, I think one thing, we've been testing some public health messages for drinks for children. And this one tagline, everyone really likes it. It's keep it simple, keep it real. And it sort of gets the message out there that, it's not complicated. It's, you just have to keep trying and just keep giving them real food, and eventually they'll, start to like it and they'll eat it. So downside, I think, of all of the Facebook groups and the blogs and all of the information that parents can get now about everything they do with their child, is that it causes a lot of anxiety, and it really makes it seem much more complicated than it really is. So I guess, trust your instincts and your child will turn out just fine. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, I like keep it simple, keep it real, not only from a nutrition standpoint, but I think it's inherently what parents are trying to do. I mean, that's what they get up in the morning and they're like, let me have a simple day. Let me do this as easily as possible. So it really does tap into their internal language, not to mention, the nutritional aspect of it. If parents and professionals listening to the show have more questions for you, how can they connect with you?
Sure. Well, we have lots of information on our website, which is yukonruddcenter.org, and they can always send a message to me through the website as well.
Wonderful. Dr. Harris, thank you so much for coming on The Nourished Child and sharing your expertise, and I'll be excited to see your future studies coming out and hope to have you back on someday.
Thanks. I appreciate being here.
Well, there you have it, folks. She has a lot to say about the toddler nutrition category, and it's really been a category over the last 5 or so years that has been exploding, and I don't see that slowing down. Maybe you've never thought about toddler milk. Maybe you know somebody with a toddler who might be confused about, do I choose a transition formula or do I choose a toddler milk? Hopefully this episode helped clear up some of that confusion for you, give you some good, solid information about those milks and how to figure out whether they are right for your kiddos or not. I thought that the research she's done and this interview was very eye-opening. Again, it just goes to re-emphasize that as parents, we have to pay attention to the products that we're purchasing. We need to read those labels. We need to look at what they are. And not only that, why are we buying them? And what function does it serve our toddlers' total diet and their health? So I'll leave you with that. I hope you found this episode to be helpful and beneficial. Again, you can find the show notes. There are links to the Rudd Center there, as well as a 2019 paper that Dr. Harris wrote on kids' drinks and the marketing that goes on around them. If you are subscribed to the show, thank you so much for being part of this community. Chat with us over on the Nourished Child Facebook page, which also serves as a hub for the blog. If you're not subscribed to this show, head over to iTunes or any Android app and hit the subscribe button. That way you'll be able to get my new shows every time they release, and I've got a lot of good stuff coming out in 2020 for you. While you're there, why don't you take a moment to rate the show? Just hit the little star buttons or write a review about the show. When you do so, it really helps other parents find the nourished child, and it helps me stay motivated and improve the show overall. Thanks to all of you who've already taken the time to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Up next on The Nourished Child, I'm covering what you need to know about growth spurts in kids from babies to teens, so stay tuned. Thanks for joining me today. It warms my heart to know that somehow, some way, this little podcast is helping you and your family. Be sure to give your toddler and your big kids a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.